All right, welcome everyone. Today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be covering Learning Plan 8. We're going to cover Learning Plan 8 in entirety today. Shouldn't be a problem. Learning Plan 8 revolves around the concept of metabolism. And so what we're going to do, I know we covered metabolism a little bit in general A&P, primarily talking about carbohydrate metabolism. We're going to revisit that topic. We're going to look at carbohydrate metabolism once again. But then also what we're going to do is we are going to look at the way that the body handles and metabolizes other foodstuffs as well. That's what we're going to focus on in the first half. And then the second half of what we're going to discuss today is looking at how your body manages its energy levels. And what I mean by that is what is your body doing immediately after you eat versus several hours after you eat. How does your body maintain its energy levels? How does your body maintain its blood glucose levels? We're going to look at that. The states of the absorptive state and the post-absorptive state. And then finally, we're going to look at some just general concepts about heat management, heat loss, some basics about healthy eating, basics about maintaining a healthy weight, and that's about it. So we're covering a wide variety of topics this week, and we'll start off with the more detailed stuff, I guess you'd say, at the beginning, and then kind of as it goes on, it gets a little bit more common sense and a little bit easier. So we'll hit the hard stuff first, but it's not hard literally in the literal sense that it's difficult to understand. It's just something that we just have to revisit these concepts. So let's start off by just talking about some of the basics. I know that we talked about the 3 different types of food as far as metabolism. So there's 3 different types of foodstuffs, or I should say 3 main categories of foodstuffs that we put into our bodies. And those 3 main categories would be carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Okay, so whatever food that we consume, it's going to be one or more of those 3 things. So everything you put in your mouth is going to be, as far as food is concerned, is going to fall into those categories. If it doesn't fall into those categories, then it probably would fall under a different category, not under the food category, but it would fit under like the vitamin and nutrient, or vitamin and, I should say, mineral family. All right, so either it's going to be a carbohydrate, it's going to be a fat, it's going to be a protein, or it's probably a vitamin or a mineral that you're putting into your body. And so we're going to just look at some of those concepts as we start off here today. So let me just jump into this. Now, maybe you've seen something like this when you were growing up. You were in school and you talked about healthy eating, and this is kind of like your basic food pyramid. This is kind of like the pyramid that I saw when I was kind of like this when I was growing up. This is a little bit different, but you'd see like the sweets at the top, eat very sparingly, and then down at the bottom you'd see like the breads and the grains and things like that. You wouldn't really see the plant oils and so forth. This is there are many versions of what they call healthy eating pyramids, and what they're trying to do here is they're trying to have you make healthy choices and eat more of things that are more beneficial and healthy for you, more natural than the stuff that isn't, and also the things that might be not as healthy for you. So this is kind of a variation of something that we saw when we were younger, but I want to just point out a couple of things of note here and why they're saying what they're saying here, and sort of differentiate and help you out here. All right, so if you were to eat a diet consistent with this, you'd probably be relatively healthy. You'd probably be in pretty decent shape as far as how healthy your body is and how healthy you're eating. At the bottom, notice the kind of thing that we can kind of skip here: daily exercise and weight control. So you gotta be physically active. You can't just sit down and expect to maintain a healthy lifestyle if you're not active and doing something physically. So that's what they're trying to impress upon you. Now over here, they're talking about the whole grain foods at most meals. Okay, now here's the thing. Some people are very, very reactive to grains. Some people do not respond well to grains at all. And they might not be, they might not have a gluten sensitivity that they know of or think they do, but some people don't respond very well to whole grains. Now, not all grains are equal either. They're saying whole grain foods at most meals. I would look at a whole grain as something like a rice or an actual piece of like bread. If you're looking at bread, you can actually see the grains in it, okay? Not the Wonder Bread that you get the white bread in the store. You see here, they put that way at the top. And here they say rice. I said rice, but the white rice, so the whole grain rice, the brown rice, the long grain rice. So the whole grain foods, they say at most meals. Again, might work okay for some people. Some people have a sensitivity, and people don't even realize what grains do to them physically until they cut them out of their diet, and they can't believe how much better they feel. Just that we aren't accustomed to that. Our American diet is so based on grains and breads and pastas and things like that, that we've just grown up that way and we've been accustomed to it. But you'd be surprised at the level of indigestion and inflammation that occurs within someone because they eat grains. So if you have problems with your digestion, you feel kind of bloated, you feel kind of uncomfortable, try cutting out the grains and see how it feels for you, all right? Oils, plant oils. Plant oils are the healthy fats. They're liquid at room temperature. Even though the fat content is high, it's low in saturated fat. It's okay for you. So there are some cultures that people live very long and very healthy lives, and they're eating plant oils with most of their meals. No surprise here, vegetables in abundance. Fruit, you can eat quite often as well, 2 to 3 servings per day, but you can have more than that. Nuts and legumes, about 1 to 3 servings if you can. They're saying fish, poultry, egg, limit yourself to about 2 servings. Dairy, calcium. Here's another thing like the whole grain foods. A lot of people eat a lot of dairy. They don't realize that they might be somewhat sensitive to dairy. You eat ice cream at night, you wake up the next day and your stomach is hurting, or you wake up in the middle of the night, your stomach is bothering you, cramping. You have intestinal problems, you've got diarrhea. Look at what you're consuming. Might be related to dairy consumption. Cut out the dairy consumption and you might feel better. Dairy and the grains, some people argue in the healthcare community, some people argue that we as humans are not designed very well to eat dairy or grains, that it's inflammatory for us. And so that's why you see things coming up now. It goes in phases, and maybe in a few years you won't hear much about it again. But right now, the paleo diet is a big thing. People talk about the paleo diet, how they stay away from the grains, they stay away from dairy, they stay away from sugars, trying to eat more like the cavemen did. The Paleolithic diet. Okay, so for what it's worth, some people try it, they love it, they stay on it. It's great. Some people have a hard time maintaining it because they like their grains, they like their dairy. But that's kind of the principle. The idea that the grains and the dairy are inflammatory and actually do more harm than good as far as eating them. And then red meat, butter, because they're high saturated fat content, stay away from those. And also the simple carbs like white rice, white bread, potato, pastas. So potatoes and pasta. So potatoes, very high sugar content. When I say sugar, you bite into potato, it's not very sweet. But what happens in like white rice, white bread, potatoes, the white pasta, it gets metabolized into simple carbohydrates very quickly, which causes a spike in your blood sugar, which then causes it to be stored relatively quickly in your body. It's kind of like taking in a large amount of cash at one time and then trying to figure out what to do with it, you can't spend it all, you're going to go and throw it in the bank right away because you don't want it sitting around. So if it comes in more slowly, or if you're eating a more complex carbohydrate like a vegetable, as your body breaks that down, it's going to take longer for it to break it apart. And so it's going to be released in your system in a more like a sustained release type of scenario. And so your body then uses it while it's made available to it. So there's not this excess in abundance that needs to get stored. So if you're looking to decrease the amount of stored carbohydrates, aka fat, stay away from the simple carbs and stick to the more complex carbohydrates, because that'll be more beneficial for you. All right, so this is one version of the healthy eating pyramid. The USDA, at least to the best of my knowledge right now, because it changes. One time I had a different one up and they said, no, that's not up anymore. It's not working anymore. The most recent is called choosemyplate.gov. Before this was mypyramid.gov. And Choose My Plate, it's the same concept. So the USDA, it has recommendations for healthy eating, and they say, and if you look at this picture, they're saying, you know, if you're sitting with a plate, you should have about this proportion be vegetables, this proportion be grains. Again, some people, the USDA is ignoring the fact that some people don't do well with grains or dairy and fruits and protein here. So here's the thing. You've got to look out for yourself. The USDA is not going to take into account the fact until there's substantial evidence and, quite honestly, substantial money behind telling people that it is not in our best interest to consume dairy or grains. Okay. Now, I'm not preaching from a perspective of someone who talks the talk and doesn't walk the walk. I eat grains and I eat dairy. I'm just telling you that right now. But I have people in my family who don't respond well to grains and don't respond well to dairy. USDA doesn't care about that. Now, I'm not being a conspiracy. I'm not diving into conspiracy theory, but it's all about the money. So we live in Wisconsin. Some of you might have a dairy farm or live on a dairy farm or know a dairy farmer. You tell them that we shouldn't be consuming milk or cheese or right or butter. They're not going to take kindly to that, right? It's a big industry. So with the industry goes the recommendations. It's going to be really hard for people to tell farmers and other people who have their lives invested in the dairy industry that dairy might not be good for people. Okay, but just think about this. Like I said, I just had a glass of milk this morning, so I'm not saying one is good or bad or indifferent. But here, think about it this way. What is milk? What's milk? What's cow's milk meant for? Baby cows. Are we baby cows? No. We're like the only animal on the face of the earth that consumes the milk of another animal. You ever think about that? Why? Why do we do it? Right? So whatever. Okay. Some people like the taste of milk. Some people like it. Some people like ice cream. Fine. I get it. I get it. But I'm just saying, you know. And as far as grains, some people argue, like I said, we're not built to have grains. We're not built to eat grains because our intestinal system is not developed for that. It's not developed to take something like wheat and grind it up and then put it with water or whatever and then make it into something and eat it. Our digestive systems may not be evolutionarily evolved to the point where it digests that efficiently. And so what happens is you've got the proteins, the gluten, the proteins from the dairy that are in our body that responds with the immune system, and the body has an immune response, an inflammatory response. The problem is it's internal. So sometimes you don't feel it because it's not significant like an internal allergic reaction, like if someone's allergic to nuts and they consume nuts and all of a sudden they break out in hives and all this stuff. It's not on that significant of a level, but it's a sensitivity. It causes an inflammatory response. And if you have dairy every day, and you have grains every day, you're chronically inflamed. But you don't realize it, okay? So this is what grains and dairy do to some people. Not all, but just making you aware of that. I want to be very frank and honest and candid with you. But again, a lot of it has to do with money. A lot of it has to do with the industry and keeping people employed and keeping people happy. USDA wants to do that. They want to support agriculture. They want to support the farmers. They want to support the people who are bringing food to our plate every day. And so they're not going. It's not going to be easy to say, you know, dairy and grains might not be the best thing for people, because there's a huge industry that comes right behind them and says, this is why it's good for you. All right. Like, get your calcium by drinking your milk, which milk isn't a great source of calcium. You can get it from other things as well. Eat some spinach, you get just as much calcium. All right. All right, so this is what we have. We have carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Again, carbohydrates come in different forms. Number one, we have complex carbohydrates. They call these the starches, like bread, cereal, crackers, flour, pasta, rice, potatoes. I'm also going to include fruits and vegetables, okay? Here's the rule of thumb. If you consume a carbohydrate and it doesn't taste sweet, it's a more complex carbohydrate than a simple carbohydrate. Simple carbohydrates are the sugars: carbonated drinks, candy, fruit, ice cream, pudding, young vegetables, all right? Lipids, fats. Okay, we have two different sources. We have animal sources, we have plant sources. So if you consume an animal fat, it's going to have a higher saturated fat percentage. It's going to be higher in saturated fat. Lard, meat, poultry, eggs, milk, and milk products. These are animal sources of lipids. Plant sources. These are primarily, like I said, going to be liquid at room temperature. Your oils, for example. Peanuts. Chocolate, there you go. Eat lots of chocolate, right? But it's a plant source. And then we have some other components here, essential fatty acids. These are subcomponents of the lipids that you can get by ingesting something. So, for example, if you eat fish, you get essential fatty acids. That's why people say, take fish oil supplements. Why are you taking fish oil supplements? Because in the fish oils, there are essential fatty acids. Whenever you see the term essential, essential means that you cannot get it, or I should say, your body cannot manufacture it on its own. Okay? So we see essential fatty acids, essential amino acids, anything that you see as essential, it means your body cannot produce it on its own. It cannot manufacture it. So you have to, but your body needs it. So your body has to take it in through the diet in order to get that. All right? And then we also have cholesterol, trans fatty acids. Now, we talk about the trans fats that get a bad rap. Okay, we do need a few of the trans fatty acids, but we don't need it in the quantity of, well, they don't have as much anymore, but like, okay, so like, you don't have to consume large amounts of Crisco, for example, to get the trans fatty acids that your body needs, okay? So stay away from the hydrogenated types of oils. You'd be surprised, you look at some foods at the amount of hydrogenated fats. Hydrogenated fats are a classification, I guess you could put them in the trans fats category. Trans fats are not they're not beneficial in large quantities, I'll put it that way. You can take some, you can use some, your body needs some, but not in excess quantities. And the food industry has learned how to make very tasty and cheap fatty types of substances that give them texture that they like and also give a taste that people like. But a lot of times that comes in the form of hydrogenated fats. And what they do with a hydrogenated fat is they superheat a fat on a metal catalyst. And then they create the fat that way. So you're like superheating the fat on a sort of type of metal, and then that creates a trans fat. You're transforming the fat. You're changing its makeup. Not very beneficial for us. Cholesterol. Cholesterol gets a bad rap. Here's the thing. This is where I come from with cholesterol. Two different ways you can get cholesterol. One is your body making its own cholesterol. And number two is getting it from an external source, like egg yolks, for example. So some people say, okay, well, I want to stay away from cholesterol because I want to keep my cholesterol levels down. Your body needs a certain threshold amount of cholesterol. Okay? So what do you think is going to be better for your body? Cholesterol that comes from an external source or the cholesterol that your body creates for itself? What do you think would be better? Cholesterol your body makes for itself. Yeah, probably. So, so what you can do, so what I'm saying is, it's not a bad thing to consume cholesterol, because what it's doing is it's introducing a little bit to your body, but also letting your body know that you're helping it out, but it also needs to help itself out. So a little bit of cholesterol in your diet is okay, but to stay away from it completely, it doesn't always work well in your favor either, because sometimes your body overcompensates. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it's not a bad thing to take some cholesterol and eat some cholesterol. The cholesterol that your body produces for itself is the most desirable and the best cholesterol, but to take some cholesterol from the outside and intake that's fine too, just not in excess. So just be aware of what you're putting in your body. Some foods that appear to be relatively healthy for you might surprisingly have cholesterol, like shrimp. If you think like seafood is relatively healthy for you, some people say, oh, I won't eat shrimp because shrimp are like bottom feeders and they, whatever. But if you like shrimp, that's a relatively healthy thing, but you got a lot of cholesterol. Go and get a package of frozen shrimp in the store and turn over and look at the nutritional information on frozen shrimp or shrimp. A lot of cholesterol in shrimp, higher level. So you don't want to eat like shrimp every day, all day long. Probably not a good idea. Once in a while, fine. You don't want to eat like 6 eggs a day and consume those 6 egg yolks. That's probably excessive as far as your cholesterol intake. But there are ways to get around that. Proteins. Proteins are the most diverse. And when we talk about proteins, we're gonna talk about what proteins mean for us. Proteins are like the building blocks, but proteins are extremely versatile. So I always think of proteins as like lumber or wood, because you can take lumber and wood, you can use it to build something, but you can also burn the wood for heat, right? And that's what proteins can be used for. So your body ideally likes to use proteins as building blocks to build things. But if your body needs energy, if your body needs that to generate the ATP to create the heat or the energy to do whatever to fuel your body, you can use the proteins and convert them over into energy if needed. But your body doesn't prefer to do that. So this is where we have to be very smart about our eating. About 10, 15 years ago, it's going to be about 15 years ago now, there was all this craze about the low-carb diets, the Atkins diet and the South Beach diet. See how this all goes in phases? Now it's the paleo. See, so these low-carb diets were the intention was to get people to cut out the carbohydrates so that they could lose weight. These diets were created for people who were looking at heart surgery, for example. They needed heart surgery, but they were overweight, they were obese. And so they put the people on these low carbohydrate diets so they would lose weight rapidly so that they could safely operate on them. It was meant to be a short-term dietary plan. They say, look at this plan. We put people on this prior to surgery so they lose the weight. Look at all the weight they're losing. Man, wouldn't it be great if everybody could do this, right? So they started having people who are perfectly normal and generally healthy. They just need to watch what they eat, but to having these people go on these diets. The problem was we are carbohydrate consumers. We are carbohydrate eaters. And we get most of our body's ATP from carbohydrate sources. The key is it's not the carbohydrate that is bad. It's the type of carbohydrate that you're eating. Okay? A piece of candy is a carbohydrate. A candy bar, carbohydrate, and other things. An apple, carbohydrate. Which is healthier, an apple or a candy bar? See? So they're saying stay away from all the carbohydrates because the carbohydrates are bad. What was happening is because people were not consuming carbohydrates, their body didn't have anything to go to for energy. So it went to the fat stores and used up the fat. But what happens when the fat's used up? Now it has to find it somewhere else. So these were high protein, low carbohydrate diets. So people were consuming proteins in high amounts, and then they were using the proteins for their energy source. But the problem is it taxes your liver and it taxes your kidneys. It's not good, sustainable over a long period of time. And so what was happening is it was messing up people's kidney function and liver function, but people couldn't stay on it because we are designed to eat carbohydrates. But instead of people reaching, saying, you know what, I'm really craving a carbohydrate and reaching for the the carrots or the celery or the broccoli or the spinach, eating the fruits or the vegetables as a carbohydrate, they go and grab a box of donuts from the store and eat the whole box of donuts because they haven't had carbohydrates for a month. And then what? You're off. Then you're back, and then you overindulge and you end up gaining that weight back, and then some. So my opinion is that if you're ever on a dietary regimen in which you are depriving yourself from what it is that you really, really, really want and is really beneficial to you, probably not a good thing. It's a good thing to have things in moderation. Okay? If every time that you consume dairy, you end up with intense abdominal cramping and diarrhea, probably a good thing to stay away from it because you're miserable taking it, right? But if you can handle it, well, then don't eat a pint of ice cream every night. You have ice cream once in a while, you know, just in moderation. And that usually works out well for people. All right, so going back to the proteins, it's kind of a preview of what we're going to be talking about a little bit later. But looking at the proteins, we have two different types of proteins. We have complete proteins, we have incomplete proteins. Complete proteins means that it has that it provides you with all of the amino acids that you need, both the essential and the non-essential. Remember, essential, you can't produce it yourself. Non-essential, you can. So it's not surprising that the complete proteins come from animal products because the animal consumed a vegetable of some sort. If you think about a cow or a pig, well, they eat everything, you know, or like a lamb or a sheep, they're consuming vegetables. And so they're converting those, they're taking in multiple vegetable sources, and so they're getting those amino acids. Maybe their body can create some of the amino acids that we can't create. So when we eat the animal or the animal product, we are getting all the amino acids, as opposed to the incomplete proteins, which are vegetable sources. So vegetable sources, if you consume, let's say, legumes versus grains, you're going to get some of the amino acids that you need, but not all. And if you just eat the grains and not the legumes, vice versa. And so I say that people who are vegetarians, they have to be very mindful of what they're putting into their bodies because they may not be getting all the proteins. And you need the proteins because proteins get broken down into amino acids. And the amino acids are sometimes things that you need in order to, for chemical reactions in the body, for enzymatic action, and so on and so forth. Here's a list of all the essential amino acids. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 of them. I'm not asking you to memorize this list, but I just want you to know what an essential amino acid is versus a non-essential. So that means that you need to get these 10 amino acids from somewhere in your diet, whether it's consuming an animal protein or a vegetable protein, but you need to consume them in order to give your body what it needs. So this is a great example of how some plants are going to give you some, but not all. So in the yellow box, you can see here that you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 amino acids. And then with the beans and other legumes, again, you get 6. But you can see that in the beans and legumes, you get isoleucine and lysine, but you cannot find that in the corn and other grains. And also the legumes, you're not going to get tryptophan or methionine. So that's what they're saying. You need to be diverse. If you're only going to consume vegetables, you have to be diverse in the plants that you're consuming so you get all of the essential amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. All right. You have another portion in your book that talks about vitamins and the vitamin requirements of humans. All right. So these are the vitamins that we need. Some of the vitamins are what we call water-soluble vitamins, and you see that shown here. It says water-soluble vitamins. This means that they are soluble in water, which means that they will be absorbed with the water and other liquids that you consume in your diet. Water-soluble vitamins can be consumed in large quantities, and whatever your body doesn't need, it will just eliminate it through the urine primarily, or through the intestines. So I don't know if any of you in here take vitamins on a regular basis or a daily basis, but if any of you don't, or any of you listening to this don't, if I were to hand you a multivitamin that has a lot of the B vitamins and all the other types of B vitamins, but concentrating primarily on the B vitamins here. If I were to give you a multivitamin or a B complex and say, here, take this tomorrow morning, and you've never taken a vitamin before, multivitamin before, later on in the day, you're going to urinate and you're going to be amazed that your urine is like fluorescent yellow. And that's because the B vitamins turn your urine a very bright yellow color. This means that your body has taken in, absorbed the B vitamins, and what you're peeing out is the excess. So we have 5 here, but we're missing B4. There's no B4. We have 5 different B vitamins that we see here. Vitamin B1, B2, B3, B6, B5. And some of them have alternate names. So thiamine for B1, riboflavin for 2, B3 is actually niacin. Why they didn't have that? No, they have it there. They just don't call it B3. I don't know why they switched it around. They B3 in parentheses and niacin, not niacin is B3. And you can see other names here. All right, so the B vitamins are a lot of times coenzymes, meaning that they help your body perform important functions in metabolism. So your metabolic processes don't work as efficiently if you don't have your B vitamins. So that's why B vitamins are very important. They help your body do what it needs to do. It's kind of like asking an engine to work, but you're not giving it the proper mixture of the things that it needs in order for the pistons and the other moving parts to move effectively and to completely combust and basically turn the fuel into energy. All right, so here's where I do a little bit of talking about vitamins for us and also for little kids. So let's just start off with the little kids. Okay, so if you have little kids, because they're not adults, you, as a parent or as an adult with a little child, you have to make some decisions for them because they're too young to make those decisions. They don't realize the consequences of doing or not doing something. And so I'm a big proponent of providing children with multivitamins. The problem is some kids don't like some multivitamins. They're picky. But have you ever seen what a kid eats unto themselves? Hot dogs. They like mac and cheese. They like, they like the stuff. I mean, some kids like their vegetables and they eat healthy. And hopefully, when you're feeding kids, you're putting healthy choices in front of them. But sometimes just because it's in front of them doesn't mean they're going to eat it. So with that being said, if you provide them with a multivitamin, at least you're making sure you're covering your bases, that you're at least providing them with some opportunity to get some of these things that are important for them. One of the easiest multivitamins that you can give a child is one of those gummy vitamins. The problem with the gummy vitamins that I've seen is that they don't always include a nice array of the B vitamins. So if you look at this list and then you go to Walmart and grab like the Flintstones gummy vitamins and look at the back, or the Disney Fairy gummies and look on the back, you're going to be missing a lot of the B vitamins. Well, we need that. Okay, so you have to make sure either they're getting through their diet or that you look a little bit more carefully at the B vitamins. There are some gummy vitamins that do provide you with a better array of B vitamins. Unfortunately, you can't just go like to Walmart, for example, or Target and get them, or Walgreens. You have to go more to like a specialty type of store or online. So there's a brand called Yummy Bears, Y-U-M-M-I, Yummy Bears, and they make a nice multivitamin. It's a gummy form. There's another one called Animal Parade. And if you live in this area and you're in Sheboygan, Nature's Best is a like a nutritional supplement store, the health store. You go to Nature's Best, which is right along the riverfront. You can get Animal Parade gummies there, and they have a nice array of the B vitamins as well. So you just have to look at what you're giving them. The Flintstone vitamins, like the Flintstone vitamins. I used to have Flintstone vitamins when I was a kid. They're awesome. They have a lot of. Here we go. There's B9 and B12 finishing off the B vitamin. They're awesome. You get the Flintstone vitamins complete, great. But some kids just don't like them. They don't like the texture. They don't like chewing vitamins. So if all they take is the Flintstone gummy vitamin, hey, at least then they're getting something. But like the Yummy Bears and Animal Parade, but the Yummy Bears for sure, they taste just like regular gummy bears, so you can probably get them to eat them. All right, so over here on the far right side of the screen, this is where I beg to differ from the book. And the book and I rarely disagree, but in this case, I greatly disagree. And where I disagree is not so much with the deficiency, but the symptoms of extreme excess. Because you would have to consume a whole, pardon the expression, crap load of vitamins to ever run into an issue with significant health issues coming from overconsumption of vitamins. There are no documented cases that I know of, and if they are, they're very far and few between, of anybody dying from excess vitamin consumption. How many people die a year from excess drug consumption? What I don't like about this is that they're showing people if you take too many vitamins, you're going to have issues and problems. We have issues and problems because we don't have enough of these. So, in my humble opinion, I don't really pay much attention to these things of extreme excess. There's only one vitamin that I can see that you can consume in extreme excess, which may cause some problems, vitamin A. And that's primarily for women who are pregnant. Then you have to watch your vitamin A consumption. But you have to exceed like, I don't know, something like 15,000 IUs, which is a lot of vitamin A, a lot. So besides that, really, I don't see any problem with consuming vitamins. And number two, when you take a vitamin in a vitamin supplement, the absorption rate isn't 100%. Just because you consume a vitamin and it says 300% of the vitamin, that doesn't mean you're consuming 300% of the vitamin and it's going to be absorbed. Only some of that gets absorbed because it's just running along your intestines. Whatever happens to get picked up along the way gets picked up. What it doesn't, doesn't. Just like the food you eat too. You don't absorb all of the nutrients from all the food you eat. Whatever you pick up, you pick up. Vitamin D. Ignore this. In my opinion, ignore it. the research keeps showing more and more and more and more that we are deficient in vitamin D. For heaven's sakes, take it. And you're not going to have brain damage or kidney damage from taking too much vitamin D, in my opinion, okay? And if you go online and you do a search and you say, okay, number of cases of brain damage, cardiovascular damage, or kidney damage from excess vitamin D consumption, if you find an article on that showing that people are dying or suffering from brain, cardiovascular, kidney damage because of excess vitamin D consumption, please send it to me, because I'd like to see it. All right. These are ones you see here on the screen are what we call fat-soluble vitamins, meaning that they have to be absorbed with your dietary fats in order to be effectively absorbed. That's why, for me, one of the primary reasons why I drink milk in the morning is because I drink milk when I take my multivitamins, because they slide down more easily. And number two, because I'm giving a little bit of fat so that I can better absorb the fat-soluble vitamins. That's primarily why I drink milk. Okay. So, just had a little bit of an introduction. When we come back, we'll start looking at metabolism, how your body breaks down the different foodstuffs, and look at this a little bit, review what we talked about in general A&P. What questions do you have for me on anything that we talked about, or anything that you might want to know or have questions about before we take a break in regard to the things that we just talked about? I never really put a cap on the whole vitamin thing, talking about adults too. Same thing, you know, I always recommend that adults get multivitamins, and now they're coming more variety than ever. If you just take just a basic garden variety multivitamin, a Centrum, whatever, that's fine. Take something, because again, our diets aren't the best either, and I know there are days that I probably don't consume all my vitamins or sufficient number of vitamins based on what I'm eating for the day. They have adult gummies too now. And the one thing you have to be careful of is don't give a child an adult gummy vitamin, because the amounts are different. So don't say, well, this gummy, because it's for adults, it has a nice array of B vitamins, I'll just give it to my child. Don't do that, because it's not intended for them. You might be getting some things that could be potentially harmful, especially when it comes to the minerals, different quantities, different concentrations. So, all right. Okay, let's take a break. And we will come back and pick up where we left off.
meat, that it accumulates in their, the vitamin A accumulates in their liver, and then if a human eats the liver of a polar bear, they will die.
Vitamin A overdose. So don't eat a polar bear liver. All right. Well, that's a new one. I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, 2 different doctors on 2 different sides
All right.
have said it.
Don't eat polar bear livers.
That's the only thing I can find of overdose.
For overdose, yeah. Vitamin A can be toxic if you consume too much of it. So when you go to the restaurant, don't ask for the polar bear liver. Stay away from that. Or at least don't eat. You have to eat the whole thing, or just
the
part?
liver.
Just the liver.
Just the liver.
All right. All right. So I spent the first third of this class on the first Roman numeral number 1, letter A of page 1, but we'll go faster, I promise. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to turn turn this on. I just realized I didn't share the screen last time, but we're okay. We're gonna start up here, and we're going to look at metabolism. And so when we look at the metabolic processes, they're either going to be what we call anabolic or catabolic. And so there's a general principle. We'll talk about minerals in a little bit. I'm gonna open up a new window here because I just want to share with you the basics of metabolism, because if you understand this concept to talk about in general A&P. I understand some of you maybe didn't have me for general A&P, so I'm going to make sure I cover this concept. But it's a general concept, and if you understand this concept, then you'll understand metabolism. So really what metabolism is all about, and what we're concerned with, is harnessing the energy from the food that we eat. Okay, so first of all, before I get into this, where does all of our energy come from? All the energy on this planet, where does it come from? From where?
The sun.
The sun, yeah. Because the sun provides us with the energy. The sun shines on the plants. The plants convert the sunlight into energy through a process called photosynthesis. And then an animal eats the plant, and then they get their energy from the plant. So what we're doing is we're basically fueling our bodies with the energy that came from the sun energy. All right? We're not going to learn photosynthesis here. I don't even know how photosynthesis works, except for just that the sun converts the energy into, the sun's energy gets converted into the plant energy. All right, but what I do know is that, let's say we consume a protein, okay? We're not going to eat a polar bear liver, though. Okay, but we're going to consume a protein. Now, if we take that protein and break it up into smaller pieces, what are we going to be left with? What are the building blocks of proteins? You got it, amino acids. If we take those amino acids and we stick them together, then we form a protein. See? That's why we need those amino acids, because we use those amino acids to make proteins, which have a variety of different functions within our body. So protein is a chain of amino acids. Think back to protein synthesis, and we talked about that, remember? The APE site. All right, so we have an amino acid. I'm just going to use A for amino acid. Amino acid. That's formed a bond with another one, which is formed a bond with another one, and another one. Okay? So that's what a protein is. It's a chain of amino acids. What's keeping these amino acids together? What's between them? What's that? What does that represent, that line? I'm not good at chemistry. I don't even know what that answer is.
Hydrogen bond?
I'm not even that specific. What is it? A generic, what is it? Just take off hydrogen. It's a bond, right? Okay, there's a bond. Okay, so we have a bond between two amino acids, right? Peptide bond. Sure, whatever you call it. Doesn't matter. All right. So TNT, what is TNT? Not a television station, but what is TNT? Goes kaboom, what is it? Dynamite, right? An explosive, okay? So you have these really thick nitrogen bonds, okay? Between two different components, right? So we have a nitrogen, nice, well, it would be nitrogen, right? Nitrogen. Sure, whatever. Okay, whatever. There's two subcomponents, but they're held together by a very, very strong triple nitrogen bond. What happens when you break that bond? What does dynamite do? It explodes. It's a release of what? Energy. When you break a bond, you release energy. Okay? So if we break a bond and we release energy over there, what do you think is going to happen if we break this bond? What are we going to release? Energy. All right? So this energy can be used for a variety of things. So let's say that I have two carbohydrates. I shouldn't say carbohydrates. Let's say I have two glucose molecules. One here, glucose. Another one here, glucose. How do I get these two to stick together?
Form a bond.
You form a bond. Forming a bond requires what? Energy. So I can take energy and use energy to form a bond between two subunits. Did you see that? All right, so I've got two amino acids. I have two glucose molecules. If I break the bond between the two amino acids, what do I release? Energy. I can use that energy to form a bond somewhere else. See that? Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's simply transferred. See? All right. So, what does ATP stand for? Anybody know what ATP stands for? Adenosine triphosphate, yes. We got adenosine, and then we have 1, 2, 3 phosphates. Yeah, it's ATP. What's the difference between ATP and ADP? That's the difference. One less phosphate. You see that? Okay. So I'm going to eat candy bar. Candy bar is what kind of food? Carbohydrate? Well, I shouldn't. Oh man, that's a bad question because it's okay. I'm going to eat a piece of candy. I'm going to crunch up a piece of hard candy in my mouth. Okay, what is that?
Sugar.
Sugar, which is what category? Carbohydrate, fat, or protein? Carbohydrate. Okay, so I'm going to break apart that carbohydrate. So I've got these glucose molecules, which are all bound together. Through my digestive processes, I break the bonds between these glucose molecules. What am I releasing? Energy. Yes. So I got a phosphate that's kind of floating around here. And I want to create ATP. How do I create ATP from ADP? What do I have to do? With this phosphate, what do I have to do?
Bond it to.
I have to stick it over here, right? How do I make this phosphate stick? How do I make this phosphate stick to this phosphate? Forming a bond. What do I require for a bond? What's that?
Energy.
Energy. Yeah. Where did the energy come from?
Breaking up the glucose.
Yeah, breaking up the glucose. So I took that energy that was released from breaking this bond here. I take that energy and I convert ADP into ATP. Oh, there you go. Now let's say that I have 2 amino acids and I need to form a protein. I need to start forming a protein chain. What do I need to do in order to stick these 2 amino acids together? I need to form a what between them? A bond, which requires what? Energy. So if I've got ATP sitting here, how can I use ATP to give me the energy I need to put these 2 amino acids together? What do? You break it apart. You take this phosphate off. You broke the bond, so now what's released? Energy. And then energy can be used to form a bond here. See? That's why we need ATP. Because ATP, by breaking the bonds of ATP, breaking the phosphate off ATP, converting it to ADP, we lose the phosphate, we release the energy, that energy can be used to form a bond somewhere else. That's what our body does. Transferred energy. So just to sum it up for you here, going back, well, that's not what I wanted in the first place here. Come on now. Work with me, buddy. All right. So, through your digestive processes, you break apart the bonds between the food subunits. So glucose, for example. Break the carbohydrate apart. We're breaking the bonds between the glucose monomers, releasing energy. That energy then gets converted into ATP, or it gets stored in ATP by taking this energy and forming a bond to convert ADP into ATP. And then later on, when we need to form a bond somewhere in the body, we break off this phosphate, release the energy, and then that energy can be used to form a bond where your body needs it. That's how it works. That's why we need to eat. Because what we're doing is we're putting food into ourselves, which contains the potential energy. We release that energy by breaking the bonds. That released energy gets taken in by the ATP. We actually create ATP with that energy, and then we can use the potential energy in ATP to form bonds later on, or for whatever else we need. That's it. Go ahead.
Do you form bonds for storage and then break is that how it works? Or do you just
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like you form, like when you're saying like you're bonding like 2 glucose. So then you're bonding those 2 glucose to get stored. And
Yes.
then like the body will just retrieve them when they need energy to break apart.
Correct.
Okay.
So your body will store the energy in a carbohydrate form called glycogen. And then what you do, you convert the glucose into glycogen. And then the glycogen gets stored in the liver or the muscles. And then when your body needs the energy, it'll go and pull out the glycogen and start breaking it apart and breaking those bonds and then converting the energy from those broken bonds into ATP. Exactly. That's what your body does. Forms bonds to store the energy and then breaks the bonds to release it. And it's just sharing along the way. That's what it does. So if you get this concept, you get metabolism. I mean, that's the key. This is the key. Because if you look at any sort of I don't know if I have the slideshow, if I have the slide here, but if I do, I'll take you through it. And if I don't, I'll find it. Because I don't know if I have it. I don't. I had a really cool, let's see if maybe it's on my older PowerPoint, because I know that there's a really cool PowerPoint that I used to have that showed everything. It was a really nice slide. I don't have it there. I'm going to have to find it. I've got it somewhere. Got it down here maybe. I'm going to find it because it's a really cool picture when we get into glycolysis. I'll take you through step by step, but you can see how it works. All right. So before we get into that, we also have minerals and we have certain mineral requirements. So in a multivitamin usually has mineral supplements within it. So here's a table that shows you the minerals. There are two different ways that we perform what's called phosphorylation, which is directly related to what we just talked about. What phosphorylation is basically the process at which you are converting ADP into ATP. So you're taking those two phosphates and you're adding a third. That's called phosphorylation, okay? So there are two different ways that we can convert ADP to ATP. One is what we call substrate level phosphorylation, what I just talked about. Taking the energy from something and converting it, releasing it and then converting it. So in this case, we have an enzyme that takes the energy from a broken bond and takes that energy to put the phosphate onto the ADP to make ATP, okay? That's one way we do it. The other way is what we call oxidative phosphorylation. And this is when we use oxygen, when oxygen is present, to take phosphates and stick it onto an ADP to make ATP, which we see in the electron transport chain, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Okay, I'm just going to see very quickly if I can find in my email archives, that glycolysis picture, because it's a really nice one. Let's see. Let me go check quickly here. I can go hunt for it, but if I can find it. At least I can find it here. This is my old online class in Angel. Get that in here. Come on now. I have it somewhere. A really cool one that I used. Find it again. Here it is. Okay, so here it is. So I'm going to show you how this works. I'm not going to do this with all of the where's my, here it is. I'm not going to do this with all of these, but I'll do it with this one just so you can see how it works. Actually, what I'm going to need to do. From my Epic pen. That up. More than one way to skin a cat, you know. Okay, there. Ink works here. Smaller. Okay. All right. All right, so zoom this in a little bit so we can see it very well. Pretty good. All right. So this is what we're going to do. I'm just going to take you through and show you how this is just that basic concept of transferring energy and then basically creating ATP with that. So the end result of when we look at glycolysis, which is the first step in our carbohydrate metabolism, I guarantee you never hear a presentation like this again, because it's just a different way of looking at it. But this is how it works. What you're going to do is you're going to invest 2 ATPs. You're going to put 2 ATPs in, but you can get those 2 ATPs back plus create 2 more ATPs. Okay, so this is what your body is doing. It's taking the food that you're eating and getting ATPs out of it. All right. So we start off with glucose. Start off with glucose here. All right. Now, what we see here is that we're going to take the energy from ATP and put that energy into this molecule. And so we end up with something called glucose 6-phosphate. Why do we call it glucose 6-phosphate? What does that mean? You have a phosphate on the what? 6th carbon, right? Okay. Where did this phosphate come from? Yeah, right here. See, we converted ATP to ADP. So what we did is we broke the phosphate off, releasing energy. And that energy was used to stick that phosphate right there. See? You see it? Okay. Then we take this enzyme, which shifts things around. It's an isomerase, so it shifts things around. So now instead of glucose 6-phosphate, it's called fructose 6-phosphate. Here comes another ATP. Rip off another phosphate and release the energy. So that energy is used to stick that phosphate that we took off the ATP right there. So now instead of fructose 6-phosphate, we have fructose 1,6-biphosphate because it has a phosphate on the 1 and the 6th carbon, right? There we go. Again, shift things around a little bit. But now what's going to happen is this molecule right here, this fructose 1,6-biphosphate, is going to split in half. So we're going to end up with these 2 molecules here, okay? They are chemical equivalents of each other, but they look different. Their structure is different. We have dihydroxyacetone phosphate and we have glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. But we need to get both of them in this form, the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. So through this enzyme, the triose phosphate isomerase, we can shift around the components of dihydroxyacetone phosphate and convert it into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Okay, so since we did that, now how many glyceraldehyde 3-phosphates do we have? 2. We have 2, right? This was 1. This one is the second one. See? Because we split it, right? So 1, 2. Everybody follow me on that? Mm-hmm. So we have two glyceraldehyde 3-phosphates. There's still 2 phosphates, okay? But now we have NAD plus a phosphate come along, and we're going to rip off 2 hydrogens from glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Okay, that's why, and we're going to drop off another phosphate. So this phosphate is going to go here. Because we broke some bonds, we broke two bonds, right? We took a hydrogen off and another hydrogen off. One of those broken bonds from the hydrogen is going to go and help us stick the phosphate here. The other one is going to stick the hydrogen onto this NAD to make us NADH, okay? So again, we're just breaking bonds and using that energy to form a bond somewhere else. So now we have two molecules of 1,3-biphosphoglycerate, okay? Now this is where we start getting the payoff now. You start getting the payoff. Because how many times did this happen? Twice, because we had two of these, right? So we have two of these, right? So we're going to see now that we're going to start to pull the phosphates back off of this molecule. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to pull this phosphate off. And we're going to take that phosphate, pull it off, and we're going to stick that phosphate onto an ADP, making what? ATP. The energy we use from breaking that bond helps us form ATP. But we do it how many times? Two. So now we have two ATPs. How many ATPs did we invest in initially? One. Two. You're right, two. I'm just counting them. So we get our two back. But how many phosphates do we still have? How many of these do we have yet? Two. Remember, we had two 1,3-biphosphoglycerates, so we have two phosphoglycerates. So we have two phosphates. So what we do is we pull off two hydrogens and an oxygen. So we see a little bit of release of water, which is a natural byproduct of the cellular metabolism. But now what we're doing is we're pulling off this phosphate. And that phosphate, oops, let's go over here. So what we're doing is we have phospholinopyruvate. We just shifted things. Well, after we take the water off, the 2-phosphoglycerate becomes phospholinopyruvate because we don't have the water anymore. Now we take that phosphate, we rip it off, stick it onto the ADP. That energy that was released is used to stick it onto the ATP. And this happens twice. So now we have two more ATPs. And then we're left with pyruvate. So if you follow that around, you could see how all we're doing is the concept I mentioned, which is breaking bonds and using that energy from the broken bond to convert ADP into ATP. That's it, okay? And you can see this in other steps of metabolism, but we don't have to do that today. But I just wanted to show you how that is the case. And most people don't talk about. Most people would be happy to take you through all the different steps of metabolism and show you all the fancy words. And I mean, I was there and did that, and I didn't understand a darn thing of what I was reading because I didn't understand that concept of energy release and transfer. But when someone finally explained to me, you're just breaking bonds and using that energy to form bonds other places, like Eureka, then it all made sense. It didn't matter what the heck the names were. What mattered is where are the phosphates going and where are they sticking onto the molecule and when they're coming off. That's what makes sense. That's where you get the sense out of this. So if you're just going through and memorizing names of molecules, it doesn't help you. To me, if you can look at it and see the name of the molecule and understand what's happening, what's shifting, that's much more beneficial, in my opinion anyway. All right, so that was the first step, which was glycolysis. And, oops. So we have glycolysis, which is the first step. That takes place in the cytosol of the cell. And we're taking glucose and converting it to pyruvate, which then can be converted to pyruvic acid. The pyruvic acid then gets converted into acetyl coenzyme A. And then that initiates what we call the Krebs cycle. But how many molecules of pyruvic acid did we get after glycolysis? Two, right? Remember, because we split that molecule and we had two. So we have two pyruvic acids. So they always say the Krebs cycle goes through twice. And the reason why the Krebs cycle goes through twice is because you have 2 molecules of acetyl coenzyme A that need to be run through the Krebs cycle. So what's going to happen in the Krebs cycle is the same thing that we saw happen in glycolysis. You're going to be getting ATP from that directly. But what you're also doing through the process of the Krebs cycle is you're actually getting some potential energy, stored energy. Your first term for today is glucose. Now, I'm not expecting you to be able to follow these step by step and understand these and give me the names of the molecules and the changes. I don't care about that. Your book leaves out a lot of steps. Your book does a great job of trying to simplify things for you. But if you went through that whole thing that I just went through, showing that whole diagram of glycolysis, and then you go ahead and you look at this, it doesn't make sense and things don't add up because they leave out steps. So if you understood what I just took you through before, don't pay any attention to this picture because it's going to screw you up because like I said, the numbers don't match. You're looking to follow ATPs and phosphates and stuff, and it's not going to work. What I want you to understand is that you end up with 2 pyruvic acids after glycolysis. If you don't have oxygen present, the pyruvic acid will get converted into lactic acid. So if you exceed the functional capacity of your cells, you're going to get lactic acid production. So if your friend asks you to go and help them move, and you're moving lots of heavy furniture and carrying it up and down stairs, and you're not used to doing that kind of work, the next day and the day after, you're going to be sore. Why? Because you didn't have enough sufficient oxygen. Your mitochondria, you don't have enough mitochondria in your cells to use the oxygen available, or your tissues aren't used to oxygenating the tissues sufficiently to allow for the muscles to do the work they need to do. And so what's happening is you're depriving those muscles of oxygen. So all that work that you're doing, you're taking that pyruvic acid and you're converting it to lactic acid, and then that lactic acid builds up in your muscle tissue, and then it's sore. So it works with that. That's anaerobic. Yes, anaerobic is lactic acid production. Yep. If you have enough oxygen, sufficient oxygen levels, then the pyruvic acid gets converted into acetyl coenzyme A. And then when it gets converted into acetyl coenzyme A, then it enters the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle, as it's called. That's the aerobic pathway. All right. Your second term is the term catabolism. So anabolism is when you take a complex molecule like a protein. Okay, wait, I don't know what I said it was. So catabolism is where you take a complex protein and you break it down into its smaller subcomponents. So like amino acids. Okay, so that's catabolism. You're breaking down a complex molecule into its subunits. Anabolism is when you take the subunits and put them together to make a more complex structure. So this is catabolism, and this is anabolism. I'm not going to take you through all this, but here's the citric acid cycle. You go through it twice because you have 2 acetyl coenzyme A's, because you had 2 pyruvic acids. Okay? So you have to go through this cycle twice. What I will direct your attention to are these things. These NADHs plus hydrogens, FADH. These are important because all of these are going to move over into the next step, which is the electron transport chain. And then by ripping off the hydrogens, you're going to be able to create more ATPs that way. All right? But what you will see is that you will create 2 ATPs from the Krebs cycle because you go through the citric acid cycle twice. So for each time you go around, you get 1 ATP, so you end up with about 2 ATPs directly from the Krebs cycle. But it's these which you're gonna make the most ATP out of. But you do that in the next step. So it's very important. I want you to understand this. I'm going to go back because I want to show you this, because this another thing that just confused the living daylights out of me, and I don't want you to be confused, especially if it's completely avoidable. Okay, this is the deal. You go through glycolysis first. Once you've completed glycolysis, then you go through the Krebs cycle. And then once you've completed the Krebs cycle, then you go into the electron transport chain. Okay? Step by step by step. And everything I'm showing you here, glycolysis, citric acid cycle, electron transport chain, this is all for carbohydrate metabolism only. Okay? So when you consume a carbohydrate, it goes through these steps. Proteins don't. Fats don't. They go through a different step, different process. This is only for carbohydrates. Steps 1, 2, 3. Okay? Make sure you understand that because you can get twisted around really quickly. I make assumptions sometimes because I've done this enough times now where it makes sense to me, but if it doesn't make sense to you, then we're in trouble here. Let me just get out of here and shrink this. Shrink down this texture. That looks better. All right, this is the electron transport chain. I'm going to keep it very, very simple. Okay. So we call this the electron transport chain because we have electrons which are basically sucking the hydrogens across a membrane and pushing it into a different area. So here we have here we had a membrane here. Okay, this is the inner mitochondrial membrane. This is taking place in the mitochondria now of the cell. All right, this is why the mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell. This is why the mitochondria are like the energy producing organelles, because they're producing ATP. This is where ATP comes from. If you have a cell that is involved in a lot of activity, it's going to build more mitochondria. So if you go running and you exercise or you lift weights or do some things with your muscles, the more you do it, the more mitochondria your muscles will develop so they can keep up with the energy demands of that tissue, right? So the mitochondria is where this is happening. The mitochondria is also where the Krebs cycle happened. Outside of the mitochondria is where glycolysis happened, okay? So once we get past glycolysis, you can see here we move into the mitochondria, and then that's where the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain happen. All right, so here we have this membrane, and across the membrane we have an imbalance. You can see that it's very positive on this side and very negative on this side, okay? We've got a lot of electrons on this side. So those electrons are going to are basically going to pull the hydrogens away from the molecule and push them across the membrane. So we're going to take the hydrogens and push them through these channels into an area of high concentration here. So the electrons are attracting the hydrogens, sucking them across and pushing them up into this area here, okay? Into this area here that's very positive. So now we've got a lot of hydrogens here which carry a positive charge. Now these hydrogens don't like to be here. They don't like to be in an area of high concentration. They want to be in an area of lower concentration, as we covered when we talked about the urinary physiology, right? Or the renal physiology. We talked about that a lot, right? High concentration, you want to go from high to low concentration, right? So we were talking about sodium, not hydrogen. Same concept though. So you've got a bunch of hydrogens up here. They're looking for a way out, and they find it right here. This is complex 5. It's also called ATP synthase. It's like a turnstile. So you go to the amusement parks and they have like the turnstile. Or you go to Menards and they have the turnstile when you go in. Same kind of thing. It's like a turnstile. It's the only way they can get out. So the hydrogen goes through this little turnstile. And as it does, this thing literally turns like a turnstile. And for every turn of the turnstile, it activates this enzyme, and this is called ATP synthase. And what it does is it converts ADP to ATP. So for every hydrogen that goes through, click, another ATP. Another hydrogen goes through, click, another ATP. Another hydrogen, click. So go back to the Krebs cycle. Look at all the hydrogens. Plus we had some from, we had two from glycolysis. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. But remember, we double this, so it's 20 hydrogens. So that equals about 20 ATPs, give or take. It's not one for one necessarily, but you're going to get a lot of ATPs from the hydrogens that you get. So that's what this is showing you. So the hydrogen goes through here. Hydrogen's happy because it's in an area of lower concentration now, and we converted the ATP into ADP. Some of the hydrogen gets converted into water as well. So when it's all said and done, I tell you, I don't know why these words are so big, some of these. So it's all said and done. This is what we've got here. From glycolysis, remember we had 2 ATPs? Glycolysis, we had 2 ATPs, remember that? And then the Krebs cycle, we made another 2 ATPs, we showed you that. 1 for each time around. But then because of all those NADHs and FADHs, you actually get about 30 ATPs from those. And then in addition to that, you get about 28. I'm sorry, no. I was going to say, what? How am I getting 30 from that? No. You get about 28 from the electron transport chain. So when you add it all up, you get about 30 ATPs, give or take, because 28 is from the electron transport chain is like the ideal, I mean like the perfect, I mean like the most you can get, the max. So on average, you get about 30 ATPs from one glucose molecule. You get a lot of energy from one glucose. So when you talk about the food that we eat, they talk about calories. The calories is the potential energy that's stored in the form of heat that would be released from that food. So if you have a candy bar and the candy bar is 200 calories or whatever it is. A calorie is actually, the calorie we call calories is actually a kilocalorie. And a kilocalorie is 1,000 of the calories with a small c. So we have a kilocalorie, which equals 1,000 of the small c calories. And a calorie, it's the amount of heat required to raise, I can't remember what the volume of water is. Maybe it's like an ounce of water, I don't know. It's some volume of water to raise the temperature of that volume of water by 1 degree Celsius. All right? So 1,000 of those is a kilocalorie, which we commonly call a calorie. So if you look at a candy bar and it's 200 calories, it's actually 200 kilocalories. It's a measurement of the potential energy that's stored in that food. If you were to burn that food, it will release a certain amount of heat, energy. And so when we're consuming glucose, That's how it comes together. So you have a certain amount of energy that your body needs, and your cells have a certain amount of glucose that they can take in a given amount of time and convert that into ATP. But depending on how much glucose you take in, you might have taken in more glucose than your body can handle within that amount of time, which is fine. Because then what your body does is it will store the excess glucose as glycogen. All right? So if you follow the purple arrows, it's just showing you the process by which you convert the glucose into glycogen. Then when you enter what we call the post-absorptive state, which we'll talk about in a little bit, very briefly, then what happens is we can take the glycogen that's stored in the liver or the muscles. We can convert the glycogen back into glucose and then use that glucose to form more ATP. So when we eat, within that window of time where we're actively taking the food that we eat, breaking it apart, and getting that glucose from the food that we ate into the cells to convert that energy into ATP, that's what we call the absorptive state. That's the absorptive state. So the ATP that we are creating is coming from the food we just ate. During the absorptive state, we're also taking glucose and converting it into glycogen. But then we're going to reach a period after we eat where we're no longer eating anymore and the blood sugar levels start to decrease. So then we enter what we call the post-absorptive state. And this is between meals. And so what we need to do is we need to go into our reserves and pull that out and release it into the blood. Release into the blood as glucose, so then we can convert that glucose back into ATP. It's kind of like money. If you think about money that way, you know, if someone hands you money and you have, you know, you got to go get some gas, pick up some groceries or do whatever. You've got the money in your hand. And let's say your total expenses are between gas and your groceries $200, but you've got $1,000 that you got in cash. Well, you're not going to use that $800. So what you can do is you can keep some of that in your wallet or your purse or whatever. That's kind of like taking the glucose and storing it as glycogen. Some of that. Maybe you want to keep, you know, $80 or something in your purse or wallet. Then you want to take the rest of that and you want to put it in the bank, right? Because you want to save some of that for later if you need it for savings or for whatever. So this is kind of how it works. So first of all, you take that glucose and you try to convert that glucose into ATP. You get as much as you can in the cells. When the cells are full, then you convert the glucose into glycogen. Then when the glycogen stores are full, then you convert what remaining glucose you have into fat. It's like taking it to the bank, keep it in the bank. So also like with money, you can carry money around in coins or different denominations of bills. Well, fat, per gram of fat, you're going to have the most concentrated energy. So you have twice as much energy stored in 1 gram of fat than you do of a carbohydrate. So it's kind of like keeping your money in larger denomination bills when you're storing it as fat. Okay? So a couple things going on here. So you got the absorptive state while you eat, the post-absorptive state when you're between meals. During the absorptive state, you're taking glucose and converting it into storage forms. When you're in the post-absorptive state and your body needs more glucose because your blood sugar levels are starting to go, then you go to the stores, you reach into your wallet or you go to the bank and you pull that out so it's available. All right? And glucose. Glucose will enter the cells until the cells have had enough. They say no more. When the cells can't take any more glucose, then glucose gets converted into glycogen in the liver and the muscles. When they become filled, then it gets stored as fat. That's why they talk about people who exercise and they build lean muscle, because the muscle is metabolically active. It's burning up the energy. And so the concept is, if your cells are constantly asking for more energy, more ATP, you're using the glucose that comes in and you're using the glycogen. And because you have such a high demand for those nutrients, you're not really storing that as fat. That's why they say build up lean muscle, because the more muscle you have, the more energy demand you're going to have, the less fat you're going to store, because you're constantly using that energy, that ATP. That's the general concept. Okay, lipids. Lipids are a little bit different here. For crying out loud. Let's see here. Okay. So, lipids. When you ingest a lipid, it gets broken into two components. Two components, glycerol and the fatty acids. Okay. Now this is lipid metabolism, not carbohydrate metabolism anymore. We're done with that. Okay. When you ingest a lipid, the lipids are going to be broken into the two subcomponents. One is glycerol and one is fatty acids. What you typically see is you have a glycerol, like a chunk here. This is glycerol, and then you have the fatty acids that are connected to it, like this. Sometimes one fatty acid has a little bend to it, okay? But that's what lipids look like. It's glycerol with the fatty acids attached to it. So you break it apart. The glycerol gets converted into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. That should sound familiar, because that was a step along the way in glycolysis. Remember we had 2 glyceraldehyde 3-phosphates? When that molecule broke in half. So the glycerol kind of jumps in there and finishes off glycolysis. So from the glycerol, you get a pyruvic acid, which then gets converted to acetyl-coenzyme A, and then you go into Krebs cycle. So some of the glycerol gets thrown right into glycolysis. The fatty acids, a little bit different. You have to do a little bit more work. So the end result is that you're taking the fatty acids and you're converting them into acetyl-coenzyme A through these steps. And I'm not going to go through these steps. But what I want you to understand here is that one thing that's going to happen here is what we call beta oxidation in the mitochondria. Because we have to convert those fatty acids into acetyl-coenzyme A. Okay, so we call that beta oxidation. And the side effect to this, which we don't talk about, is that we produce what are called ketones, ketone bodies. And now your kidneys have to deal with this. Your kidneys have to eliminate the ketones through their processes. That's why the low-carb, high-protein diets were not good for your kidneys. Because what was happening is these people were burning up their fat. Or anybody who's an uncontrolled diabetic, which I can't get into that conversation today because we don't have the time. But if you want to know, I can explain it to you some other time. So if someone is an uncontrolled diabetic, they're burning fats galore. Someone who's losing a lot of weight, and they're trying, they're going to have ketone bodies. But it doesn't last forever, because it's temporary, and then once the fat is gone, or you're not burning as much fat, or you finally reach your target weight, then you kind of level off. but the ketone bodies, the production of the ketone bodies are not good for your kidneys. And that's a byproduct of burning your fats, converting your fats into ATP. So the general takeaway is this. Lipids can be broken down to convert into ATP, and they do that by either throwing part of it into glycolysis to go through the Krebs cycle and form ATP that way, or taking the fatty acids and converting them to acetylcoenzyme A, same thing. So what you're basically doing is getting them somewhere in the middle of glycolysis and kind of throwing them in midway. And so you're not going to get like the ATPs that you would have gotten through a complete glycolysis or glycolysis at all when it comes to the fatty acids. But remember, most of the ATPs come from the Krebs cycle and beyond. So that's where you're getting your ATPs. Oh my goodness gracious. Okay. So this is kind of a summary of what I just mentioned before. Okay, so let's say that you need energy and you have to go to the fats in your adipose tissue, or maybe it's a dietary fat. So you break those fats into glycerol, fatty acids. Glycerol gets thrown into glycolysis, follow it through. Fatty acids through beta oxidation get converted into acetylcoenzyme A, but hard on the liver because you're converting the fatty acids into acetylcoenzyme A, and also your kidneys have to deal with it. So you have ketone bodies that are produced. But we'll talk about these in a little bit. But then you can go into the Krebs cycle. Third term is ATP. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is in regard to amino acids. So like I said before, amino acids and proteins are like lumber, like wood. You can use amino acids for building things. They're building blocks, and that's what your body wants to use them as. Carbohydrates are like gasoline. Gasoline is meant to be burnt for fuel, and that's what it's meant for. Carbohydrate, you can't use gasoline to build something, right? You can only use it to burn. Whereas proteins, you can burn it or you can build it. So if you have versatile uses, your body's going to want to use it for building, not burning. If your body needs to, though, however, because of circumstances, your body needs to turn to proteins to make energy, you can. And you do that through a process called transamination, oxidative deamination, and keto acid modification. So those steps are here. Basically what you're doing is you're converting the amino acids into a different form so that they can be converted into energy. The byproducts, you have ammonia production, urea, and the ketone bodies also. All right, so in your book, Table 24.4 has a summary of the metabolic reactions that occur in the body for your reference. What I'm looking for you to get out of this and to understand is the basics of what I talked about before. Let me just go through here. Okay, good. So what I'm basically looking for you to pull from this is what I talked about at the beginning of the second chunk. So the concepts of energy balance. So when you have a glucose molecule and you break apart the glucose molecules, you release that energy when you're breaking that bond, and that energy can be used to stick a phosphate onto an ADP to make ATP. You understand that concept, great. I also want you to understand that glucose, when you go through the metabolic process of glucose, you have 3 basic steps. And what are those 3 basic steps? What's the first one? Glycolysis is 1. The Krebs cycle is 2. And the third? Electron transport chain. Remember that the glycolysis does not take place in the mitochondria, but the rest do. The electron transport chain and the Krebs cycle take place in the mitochondria. I want you to understand that the difference between the absorptive state and the post-absorptive state. Absorptive state is you're using the energy that comes from the food you just ate. Post-absorptive is you're between meals, now you need to get energy from somewhere. So you can go to your storage. Remember that we have glucose. Tries to get into the cells. Once the cells are full, then what do we store the glucose as? Glycogen. Yep, through the process of glycogenesis, converting the glucose into glycogen. If glycogen stores are full, then what do we store it as? Fat. Yes. So to pull it out now, think about the same thing. Now you're in the post-absorptive state. First, you're going to go to the cells. Do you have anything in the cells? No. So the next step is you're going to go to glycogen. And you're going to use the glycogen stores first. After the glycogen stores have been depleted, then you go into the fat. That's why it's hard to get rid of fat that you've accumulated on your body, because you have to go through the other two storage forms first before you can get to the fat stores. So thinking about it from a perspective like I talked about earlier, the simpler the carbohydrate that you ingest, the more quickly it gets broken apart and the more quickly it gets converted into fat. Because your body's like, whoa, all this glucose, it can't handle it all. So it has to store it as glycogen and lipids and fat right away. Because the blood glucose spike is so rapid. If you eat a more complex carbohydrate, it takes longer for your body to break that apart, so your blood glucose levels don't spike. So it's kind of like you're trickling in the glucose into the cells and they can handle it in real time. So then you're going to have less glucose that can't get in the cells. So then you're going to have that converted into glycogen, but it's going to be slower. So the chances of that complex carbohydrate turning into fat are much less because it takes longer for your body to break it apart. Did you have a question?
I was just kind of thinking, like, so if someone's anorexic, like where they're not eating, they're not having, so their body is going through the different levels to get energy.
Yeah.
But it goes to muscle before fat. Is that because the muscle holds more ATP than fat, or like I don't know how else to explain it.
Well, relatively speaking, it may seem like that, but your body will actually go to the fat first.
Oh, really?
And then start pulling from the muscle, because then it starts. The reason why it's going after muscle is now it's protein, because it's looking for energy from somewhere, and so the fat isn't giving your body sufficient, or at least not rapid enough. So the other thing is maybe the proteins, by going through those processes, that it can get energy out of the proteins more quickly than it can get it from the fat. That might be what's happening too. Okay. But it will try to go to the fat first. Okay. But then you start to see that it'll go after the muscle, because that's the body saying,
just not getting enough.
I need energy from somewhere, so I'm going to get it. And that's what we'll talk about after the break. We'll talk about that concept very briefly. Yeah. So if you understand that stuff, that's basically what I'm looking for. I'm not asking you to be able to give me all the steps of all these different reactions and processes. Just the big picture items. What questions do you have before we take a break? We'll take a short one. We'll do about 5 minutes, because we have another section to go through relatively quickly to get you through that second set. So we'll take 5, then we'll come back, and then we'll finish up. Jump into the next one. Here we go. Okay. So, what I want to do now is I just want to show you how all this kind of fits together. I can't remember if an Angel you have 2 attendance terms or not. You might want to write these down in case there is. I can't remember if I put 2 sets on here or not. I used to cover this over 2 weeks. Now with the shortened schedule, we do it in 1. So
I only saw one up there right now, and I didn't see the exam.
yeah, there's. I'll have to look into that and see if some of those are missing. So I'll take a look. So I'll have terms for you. So just grab them, and if they are there, great. If not, then just throw them away.
And that would be part 2.
Yeah, that would be for part 2. I'm guessing they're. I don't. I've got to look. I've got to look and see if there's a part 2 component that isn't showing on Blackboard right now. So I'll check. All right. So what this picture is showing you. Now what we're doing is we're kind of looking at the post-absorptive and the absorptive state and what your body does to basically maintain constant energy levels no matter what your body's going through, okay? So as long as you're eating and you're properly nourished, theoretically your body should be able to maintain the necessary ATP levels to keep you up and running, okay? So that's what this is going to be focusing on, how your body maintains its energy levels, how your body maintains itself, given the changes in circumstances externally. All right, so here we have the 3 main foodstuffs, and this picture is just basically showing you that the preferred route for ATP is carbohydrates. Can resort to fats if you need to. We talked about that pathway, and if necessary, you can use proteins. Same thing. Okay, so that's what this picture is showing you. This picture is showing you the pathways of the absorptive state. Okay, so basically what's happening here in the absorptive state is anabolism and energy storage. We're taking the amino acids, converting them into proteins, glucose into glycogen, the glycerol and fatty acids into triglycerides. We're taking glucose and converting it into ATP. That's the focus. So as the glucose comes into our digestive system, the gastrointestinal tract, we're converting some of it into ATP. We're storing it as glycogen in the muscle and the liver, and we're also storing it as fat. That's what's happening during the absorptive state. So term 1 for the second round would be absorb. So this would be for your second attendance term. I'm not sure, like I said, if I even have them up anymore. I used to cover this over 2 weeks, but if you see a second one, then you know. If you don't, then just ignore it. All right. Insulin. Insulin directs the absorptive state. Insulin is secreted by the pancreas. So insulin is going to tell your body to get the glucose out of the blood and into the cell. Okay, that's what insulin says. Get the glucose into the cell, and whatever's left, get it converted into glycogen and fat. Then we have the post-absorptive state. Now we're between meals. Now we need to break things down. We need to take the glucose and the fatty acids and the ketones and the glycogen. We need to break that down to make ATP. So we're going to hit the glycogen stores in the muscle and in the liver, try to get ATP out of that, convert that into glucose to convert it to ATP. Once we use up our glycogen stores, then we turn to the fats, and we talked about the process by which we convert the fats into glucose. And we can get ATP. Now we talked about ketone bodies. When your body's in a state of starvation and you're burning those fats and you have the ketone bodies, your brain actually can use ketone bodies and convert ketone bodies into energy. So your nervous tissue actually can use the ketone bodies as energy. Doesn't prefer to do it, but if you're starving and ATP is running in short supply because you don't have any more glucose available, you can start using the ketone bodies for fuel for your brain. So we have glucagon, which is like the anti-insulin, glucagon. And so glucagon is going to have the opposite effect of insulin. So instead of insulin, which tells you to take the glucose and store it, the glucagon tells you to take the stuff that's stored in the stores and pull it out and release it as glucose. So you can see at the top of this picture, as glucose levels start to fall, then we have the process of glycogenolysis, which is the breaking apart of glycogen and converting it into glucose, and also breaking down the fats so that we can increase plasma glucose levels. That will stimulate insulin to be released and to get the glucose that is now available into the cells. In your book, you have this table 24/5, which takes you through the influences on metabolism. And really, for all intents and purposes, what we're talking about, focus on primarily the first two columns, insulin and glucagon. Rest of the stuff, if you have spare time and you have nothing else to worry about, you can look into that stuff. But if you focus on these two columns, that's pretty much all I'm asking you to be aware of. All right, so lipids. Lipids get transported in body fluids, but the only way that lipids can be transported in body fluids is if they're packaged in something. They have to be carried in a transport carrier because lipids are not soluble in water. So with the digested fats that you take, in order to get those fats into your bloodstream, they have to be packaged into these what are called chylomicrons, which is a lipoprotein, and then they can get into the lymphatics, and then eventually they'll make their way into the bloodstream. You can see that most of the chylomicron is a triglyceride because that's the fat that you consumed. You can see that there's a little bit of cholesterol to it, and a little bit of protein, and a little bit of a phospholipid. So you can see that this primarily basically a glob of triglyceride that's surrounded by a shell of protein. There's a little bit of cholesterol on that, probably dietary cholesterol that you ingested, and the phospholipids from whatever it is that you consumed. When we start carrying around the triglycerides, or start moving triglycerides around, or we talk about cholesterol really, and how your body transports cholesterol, then we come over here and we look at the different types of cholesterol that we're concerned with. So if you get your cholesterol taken, they look at your LDLs and your HDLs and say, we want to keep your HDLs high, you want to keep your LDLs low. Then we have the VLDLs, which are similar to LDLs, but you can see they have a different component. Now, the VLDL and the LDL, they're made by the liver. And you can see here that we're not really concerned about the VLDLs necessarily, because the VLDLs don't carry a lot of cholesterol. They carry the triglycerides. So you don't want these triglycerides being carried around and deposited in the body. But the LDLs are the ones you have to worry about. Because if your body doesn't have any use for the cholesterol, it's going to start looking for a place to basically deposit what it's carrying. And that's usually in the cardiovascular system. Whereas the HDLs, they're actually returning the cholesterol to the liver so that it can be synthesized and eliminated from the body, whatever it doesn't need. So these actually, the HDLs are kind of like the cleaners. They're kind of like taking the stuff that your body doesn't need and getting rid of it. Whereas the LDLs are kind of like the dumpers. They're taking what the body doesn't need and just dumping it somewhere. So So this is kind of like why they say that the HDLs and the LDLs are good and bad, respectively. Good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, respectively. But they do carry cholesterol. Some people are more prone just because of the genetics that their body makes more cholesterol naturally. And so they have to be very careful. And through medication, they can regulate that. All right, the liver. The liver has so many functions in metabolism, and we've talked about some of them, but we can't get into all of them here because we're just pressed for time. We talked a little bit about the role of carbohydrate metabolism. We talked a little bit about fat metabolism, what the liver does, protein metabolism. We also see that the liver is a vitamin or mineral storage. You can see that it stores 1 to 2 years supply of vitamin A. That's why we found out you don't eat polar bear livers, because you'll be eating and getting a substantial overdose of vitamin A. Interesting then, if you're eating like a calf liver, your liver and onions, it's a lot of vitamin A too. So you have to take your vitamin A for that day if you go and eat liver. Also, storage of vitamin D and B12, so your B vitamins is stored there as well. So that's why, if you take multivitamins and you take them over a sustained period of time, then you go a day or two without taking them, it's no big deal because your body stores it in some places, some of the ones you need. You also see that you store iron and other minerals. The liver also helps keep us clean. It metabolizes alcohol and drugs, getting rid of them, breaking it down. So liver does a lot for us. This picture is talking about appetite control. Basically, let's cut to the chase that in the hypothalamus, you have two areas. One is a satiety area, one is a hunger area. Some people have a mechanism that doesn't work correctly, and they're always hungry, always hungry. Satiety thing just never kicks in, and they never feel full or satisfied. We were watching, a couple of years ago, I was teaching anatomy class for a different college, and we were watching a video, and they were talking about people who this mechanism isn't working well for. And there was one guy who just was always hungry, he always ate. But his family was like right on him. And so he was a relatively normal weight. But people who have this condition, they're always hungry. They're always hungry. They never feel full. And so they always want to eat. So that brings into consideration all these other things with, it was a video about like obesity and whether obese people really can control it or not, and it was an interesting talk. And I could even, if you're interested, just send me an email and ask, and I can go dig it out for you, because I think it's in the Films on Demand here through LTC, and I can send you a link to the video if you want to watch it. That's more like a social aspect of anatomy and physiology, so if you want to watch it, you can. But basically, that's what I'm trying to show you here, is that you have sensors in your body that send signals to the hypothalamus, either telling us that we're hungry or that we're satisfied and we don't need to eat anymore. So your third term is the term heat, which is kind of where we're going to finish off today. Our body tries to keep a constant temperature, but our body is constantly working against the loss of heat to the environment through our skin and through other mechanisms. These are the four main ways that your body loses heat to the environment: through radiation, conduction or convection, evaporation. Okay, so what is radiation? Radiation is the radiant heat. So if you've ever been next to someone, standing, not touching them, but right next to them, and you can feel the heat coming off their body. Or if you put your hands out, there's a fire, and you put your hands out, you can feel the radiation, the heat. Okay, so that's one way that we lose heat, through radiation. Also through conduction and convection. So if you've got a nice cold bottle of a soft drink on the table and you grab that bottle, It feels cold. The reason why it feels cold is because the heat is leaving your hand and going into the bottle. So the liquid's actually getting warmer while you're losing the heat. So it feels cold because you are losing heat through conduction. Evaporation. You sweat, and then the air comes by, evaporates the sweat off the surface of your skin, thereby cooling it. That's evaporation. So you have to counter that with the different ways that your body produces heat through your metabolic processes. That's how you generate heat. That's one byproduct of your metabolism. We shiver, and by shivering, we're contracting the muscles. When muscles contract, they release heat. Also, epinephrine and thyroxine, your thyroid hormones, your adrenal hormones, and then the temperature effect. Warmer cells metabolize faster, producing more heat. So by just keeping your body warm, the cells are going to metabolize faster and then in turn produce more heat. So here's the homeostatic mechanism for regulating body temperature. I don't need to go into this because we've talked about this already in previous learning plans. But basically what it comes down to is your body is just maintaining its, it basically wants to counter the heat loss with its mechanisms to keep heat. Keep producing heat, I should say. All right. So that, my friends, is that. So the big takeaways, like I said, I hit them before we took our last break. But remember, the three different foodstuffs: carbohydrates, proteins, fats, how your body metabolizes them, the general principle of energy. Break a bond, you release energy. That energy is used to form a bond somewhere else. There's a lot. What questions do you have? All right. So I know that I have to look at Blackboard and see what is showing, what isn't showing for Learning Plan 8. So I'll go in and take a look. So you might see that what is there is there. I'll send an email either way, letting you know whether there's more stuff to come on Learning Plan 8 or if I added more stuff. So if you don't get an email from me saying, I'll put it this way: if you don't get an email from me saying I added a couple more assignments to Learning Plan 8, what you see is what you get. Okay, and then the exam will make sure that's showing up too. Good to go? Okay.